In the silence of Northern California's forests, where sunlight filtered through redwoods and coastal fog curled along the trails, something was waiting in the trees. Between 1979 and 1981, 8 lives were taken, each one brutally ended in what should have been a sanctuary. The killer didn't come from the shadows of myth or legend, but from the concrete neighborhoods of San Francisco. His name was David Joseph Carpenter, and he would later be known as the Trailside Killer. Carpenter was born on May 6, 1930, in San Francisco. From the start, his life was shaped by control, cruelty, and silence. He had a debilitating stutter that drew ridicule from classmates. His father, an alcoholic, beat him frequently. His mother, domineering and cold, barred him from playing outside and forced him into violin and ballet lessons, activities that only deepened his social isolation. He wet the bed into adolescence, and even more disturbingly was known to harm animals. When he was accused of biting a neighborhood child, he vanished from school for several days. When he returned, his arms were covered in bruises. By 15, Carpenter had already begun acting on urges that would later evolve into something far more violent. He admitted years later that during his teenage years, he took advantage of children in his community. At 17, he was arrested for an attack on a toddler. Instead of prison, he was sent to Napa State Hospital, where doctors measured his IQ at 125, above average. But intellect meant nothing in the face of what was growing inside him. He was released, only to be arrested again in 1950 for the alleged assault of a teenage girl. That time he was acquitted. Trying to appear like a normal man, he got married, had 3 children, and began working at a San Francisco post office. But in July of 1960, the facade shattered. Armed with a hammer and a knife, Carpenter attacked a woman named Lois D'Andrade in the middle of the city. He slashed her hands, beat her on the head, and only stopped when a military officer intervened and shot him. During the attack, witnesses noted something strange. His stutter, usually severe, disappeared completely. He was sentenced to 14 years but served only 7. Freedom didn't tame him. In January 1970, he committed a string of violent assaults in Santa Cruz, using a shotgun to threaten women, forcing them into cars, and attacking them. He was arrested again, and during his time in jail, he began telling fellow inmates that he was the infamous Zodiac Killer. He wasn't, but the craving for recognition had become another obsession. Later that year, he escaped from a jail in Calaveras County by cutting through the bars with 5 other inmates. The escape didn't last long. He was caught and transferred to Folsom State Prison, where he remained until May 1979, when, once again, he was granted parole. At 49 years old, Carpenter returned to live with his parents in the Glen Park neighborhood of San Francisco. To the outside world, he was just another man rebuilding his life. But within weeks, the woods of Northern California would begin to whisper his name. On August 20th, 1979, the first body was found. 44-year-old Etta Kane, a bank employee and experienced hiker, had gone out for a walk near Mount Tamalpais and never returned. Her husband, John, reported her missing. Her body was found the next day, off a popular trail. She had been stripped and shot once in the head. No one had seen or heard a thing. There was no sign of a struggle. Authorities were baffled, but it wouldn't be the last time a quiet trail turned into a crime scene. 2 months later, on October 21st, 23-year-old Mary Bennett was jogging at Land's End near San Francisco. Carpenter emerged from the trees and dragged her into the underbrush. She fought back, so much so that she managed to injure his hand, but he responded with unrelenting violence. Her body was discovered hours later, partially hidden under leaves. The wounds were extensive. Local residents later said they had heard screams but assumed a nearby police cruiser would investigate. It never did. That night, Carpenter showed up at an emergency room claiming he'd been bitten by a dog. Then, for nearly a year, there was silence. But the quiet was deceptive. Carpenter was watching, waiting, choosing. On October 11, 1980, he returned to the Point Reyes National Seashore. 19-year-old Richard Stowers and 18-year-old Cynthia Moreland were walking together, enjoying the autumn weather. They never saw him coming. Carpenter forced them to their knees and executed them both. Their disappearance was initially dismissed as a possible elopement, especially after Moreland's car was discovered abandoned. But that illusion collapsed 4 weeks later. On October 14th, 26-year-old Ann Alderson went missing near Mount Tamalpais, not far from where Etta Kane had been found. Alderson had recently returned to the Bay Area after working with the Peace Corps in Colombia. She was thoughtful, intelligent, and deeply committed to the environment. Her father reported her missing when she failed to return home. A search team discovered her body the next day. She had been assaulted and shot, left alone in the forest she loved. Then, as November came to a close, the nightmare escalated. Diane O'Connell, a Cornell University graduate, was hiking alone on November 28th when she vanished. The following day, her body was found, shot and discarded. That same day, another woman's body was discovered, 23-year-old Shauna May. She had also been out hiking near Point Reyes. It's believed both women were attacked on the same day. And not long after, the decomposing bodies of Stowers and Moreland were recovered nearby. In just over 6 weeks, 5 people had died. By December, authorities finally acknowledged the pattern. A single killer operating across Northern California parks, targeting hikers, often women but sometimes couples. A psychological profile emerged, describing someone who enjoyed control and degradation, who thrived on fear. Witnesses described a suspicious man in the area, white, average build, with medium-length brown hair. A sketch was circulated, but it didn't lead to any arrests. Then came March 29, 1981. Carpenter drove over 90 miles to Henry Cowell Redwood State Park in Santa Cruz. From an elevated observation point, he spotted a couple, Ellen Hansen and Stephen Hertel, walking along a quiet trail. They were both 20 years old, both students at UC Davis. Carpenter approached them with a gun. He ordered them down the trail. When Ellen resisted his threats, he opened fire. She was shot multiple times and died at the scene. Stephen, though hit in the neck and left for dead, survived. He would become the key that unlocked the entire case. Stephen Hertel had been shot in the neck. The damage was severe, his vocal cords were scarred, and one of his eyes was affected, but he survived. When police interviewed him, he told them something that changed the investigation. The man who attacked him and Ellen wasn't in his 20s or 30s, as the original sketch suggested. He was much older. Based on Stephen's description, a new composite was drawn. This time, it looked remarkably like David Carpenter. On May 2nd, just over a month after the Santa Cruz attack, Carpenter made a final fatal move. He invited his co-worker, 20-year-old Heather Skaggs, to go shopping. She told her boyfriend about the plan. She never came back. 3 weeks later, her body was found in Big Basin State Park. She had been assaulted and shot in the head. It was the same pattern: isolated trail, sudden violence, silence. What Carpenter didn't realize was that people were talking. 3 individuals came forward, including a former girlfriend. All of them told police that the man in the news sketch looked just like David. Investigators began surveillance on his home in the Glen Park neighborhood. He still lived with his parents. Then came the moment of truth. Stephen Hertel, along with 6 other witnesses, picked Carpenter out of a lineup without hesitation. That was enough. Police searched his home and found detailed maps of hiking trails throughout California. They also recovered a .38 caliber revolver. Ballistics testing confirmed that it had been the weapon used to kill Ellen Hansen. On May 14, 1981, David Joseph Carpenter was arrested. He was charged with the murder of Ellen Hansen, then later with Heather Skaggs. By July, prosecutors had filed 5 more murder charges, along with charges of sexual assault and attempted murder. The cases were overwhelming in scope. Carpenter's past caught up with him quickly, an ugly history of violence, cruelty, and deceit. Rumors swirled that he might have been the Zodiac Killer, but those were quickly dismissed. He had been in prison when the earliest Zodiac murders occurred. In 1982, Carpenter's attorneys requested that the trial be moved out of Santa Cruz County due to pre-trial publicity. The case was transferred to Los Angeles. It would be one of the most closely watched murder trials in California's history. In May of 1984, the courtroom listened as Stephen Herdle pointed to Carpenter and identified him as the man who killed Ellen. His voice was rough, the product of a shredded throat, but his words were clear. He told the jury how Carpenter had threatened them, walked them deeper into the woods, and pulled the trigger when Ellen resisted. During closing arguments, the defense shocked everyone. One of Carpenter's lawyers admitted that his client had committed the murders. Their argument was no longer about guilt, it was about whether Carpenter was mentally fit to be sentenced to death. The jury didn't hesitate. On July 5th, after just 8 hours of deliberation, they returned with a verdict, guilty on all counts. Later that year, he was sentenced to die in the gas chamber, but it wasn't over. In January 1988, Carpenter went on trial again, this time in San Diego County for the Marin County murders. The evidence was just as strong and the crimes just as horrific. On May 10th, he was convicted of 5 more murders, 2 assaults, and another attempted assault. He was sentenced to death again. In the years that followed, Carpenter launched a series of appeals. Some of them worked briefly. His Marin County convictions were overturned in 1989 due to a juror being improperly informed of his record, but the California Supreme Court reversed that ruling. Later, his convictions in the Santa Cruz trial were also overturned, but reinstated on appeal. His attempts to escape justice through legal technicalities failed again and again. In 2010, DNA testing confirmed what many had long believed. Carpenter was responsible for the murder of Mary Bennett, the jogger from Land's End in 1979. Her case had gone cold for decades, but science brought it back to life. Even now, he remains a suspect in other unsolved cases, including the deaths of Etta Kane and Barbara Schwartz. But no further charges have been filed. David Carpenter has spent over 40 years on death row, longer than almost anyone in California history. In 2019, Governor Gavin Newsom announced a moratorium on executions, effectively freezing all death penalty cases in the state. In 2023, San Quentin, the prison that housed California's death row, began transitioning into a rehabilitation center. Carpenter, now 95 years old, is still alive, still under sentence of death, still locked away. Among his victims, one name is remembered with particular reverence: Ellen Hansen. Her courage, her refusal to be silent in the face of terror, has not been forgotten. A memorial scholarship in her name now helps students at the University of California, Davis. In the end, David Carpenter wanted control. What he left behind was a trail of grief, shattered families, and forest paths that still feel colder than they should. He may be forgotten behind prison walls, but his shadow remains, long, dark, and silent. along the trails where the trees once hid a predator.